US and Russia. We have been learning more and more with certainty that Donald Trump's administration is in fact pro Russia. As I've said once, Trump's main primary goal is to normalize relations with Russia. The second is to extract as much as possible from Ukraine. And a distant goal, third goal is to basically have truce, but that truce does not have to be a peace that just does not have to be just. Basically, there doesn't need to be any justice. As long as the war ends, Trump's happy, and that's basically it. That's all they wrote. I've been going to Ukraine, as you may know or not, fairly on a regular basis. I probably will be going to Ukraine again pretty soon. And I've mainly been focusing on an organization that rescues children from occupied territories and from Russia, kidnapped children. It is a very important thing as it constitutes a genocide, transferring children from one group into another. That's one of the ways of enacting genocide listed in convention, the Genocide Convention. And I've been doing some interviews with the organization. I've managed to get an interview with a rescued child as well. It's a very serious topic that is underreported, and not enough people are talking about it on a regular basis. Just how horrible and large scale this phenomenon is of Russians basically kidnapping thousands upon thousands of children and taking them to Russia to Russify them, to turn them into Russian citizens. And now the United States DOGE organization, the organization that is supposed to cut waste, cut wasteful spending and corruption from the US. They have decided that an organization, a team that helps to rescue Ukrainian children, is a wasteful one, that it's a waste of money, I guess, to rescue Ukrainian children, that it's, I guess there's corruption involved, and therefore, as the headline itself says, Musk cancels funding for team helping to rescue Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. There's no bigger evidence of the fact that the US has chosen to support Russia in these peace talks. Okay? And we're going to discuss this briefly, but that's not all. That's not all. There are three major news when it comes to Ukrainian children that we're going to go over today. And this is just one of them. Two are about the US, and two are regarding Russia, Russia itself. Trump is pro anyone who kisses his ass, and Putin is willing to do so to get what he wants. It's all bad. So, Elon Musk's large-scale cuts to funding in the US government have suspended the work of a Yale University team that helped rescue hundreds of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. Until now, the US government had funded a group of researchers from Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab who used open source technologies to track missing children and shared their findings with the Ukrainian authorities to help bring them back home. I guess, according to Elon Musk, that's just a waste of money. Rescuing children is something that the US can save a few bucks on to write those $5,000 checks to people, apparently, supposedly. Hundreds of children were rescued thanks to their efforts, but now this work will cease due to Musk's recent federal funding cuts. This is the face of cutting waste from the US government. Hundreds of children will not see their families again. They will become loyal Russian citizens, probably soldiers. They will be sent into war, probably against their home countries. It's brilliant. It's just, DOGE is such a wonderful organization. This really needed to be done. This really needed to happen. Ukrainian government data says that nearly 20,000 children have been abducted by Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022. And keep in mind, the abduction of children has been happening since 2014, not since 2022. The abduction of children has been has begun from the very beginning of the war in Donbass. That has been a thing that um, children would go on vacation. They would select a travel destination. They would be taken there on a bus, and suddenly they would be stopped by a group of separatists backed by Russia, and that bus would be redirected to head straight to, well, Russia. That is how the kidnapping has been happening since 2014. Ever since the full-scale invasion started, the Russian army has straight up just they went into orphanages and started kidnapping children and other places. All children from war zones have been taken to Russia because they need to be protected, quote unquote. That is the justification that Russia has given for kidnapping of the children, that they are rescuing them from hot conflict zones, even though they could be given to their families that live in relatively safe parts of Ukraine. And also, there's another way of kidnapping children, which is to send them to recreation camps from which they will never return. In March 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian leader Vladimir Putin and children's rights commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova over the deportation of Ukrainian children from the occupied territories of Ukraine to Russia, not just from the occupied territories, also from active war zone, active places where war was going on. Russian troops would enter. They would enter, like I said, orphanages, for example, take all the children from there and just take them to Russia to be Russified. So that is happening. Elon Musk's Doge has cut support for a group that has been helping to rescue children. But that's not all. If you're in doubt, okay, so that's just, I don't know, that's just Doge's weird way of cutting any sort of spending to finding money anywhere it can. It doesn't necessarily mean that the US has any sort of pro Russian stance. It doesn't necessarily mean that this was a move made if as means to appease Russia in any way during negotiations. Well, what if at the same time the United States withdrew from group investigating Russian leadership for crimes against Ukraine, and that includes the kidnapping of Ukrainian children? So at the same time, Trump's, or rather Musk's Doge, gutted funding for a group that help rescuing children, but also has the entirety of the U.S. has withdrawn itself from a international group investigating Russian leadership for crimes against Ukraine. At this point, you have to tell yourself, yeah, there is definitely the U.S. at this point is definitely working in Russia's interest. The US has privately told European officials that it is pulling back from an international group investigating Russian leaders for the crime of aggression committed against Ukraine, the New York Times reported on March 17th, citing undisclosed sources. And just it suddenly feels so pathetic, suddenly feels so ridiculous when Trump says, I'm on all sides, I'm on the side of humanity, I just want the killing to stop, just want the deaths to stop. When all he's doing is giving, he said that nobody has the cards. He says that Ukraine has no cards, but also Russia has no cards. But the problem is that Trump is actively giving Russia more and more cards and pressuring Ukraine more and more and more. He recently admitted that the whole debacle at the White House, when he and JD Vance screamed at Zelensky, that was just a pressure tactic to make Ukraine act in the way that Trump wants it to. It was just pressuring Ukraine to do the right thing, supposedly. And there's no pressure on Russia. There's just vague, empty gesturing towards um, tariffs and sanctions if Russia doesn't do what he wants. But at the end of the day, Russia has refused the ceasefire, and there's been a development to the ceasefire, but it's still not exactly what was supposed to happen. And again, the US is just giving Russia more and more cards by withdrawing from, by first of all, by framing Ukraine somehow as the aggressor in the war, by calling Zelensky a dictator, which, as much as Trump has backpedaled from that, he did call him a dictator, by withdrawing from organizations that help rescue kidnapped children, by sanctioning the organization that put out an arrest warrant for Donald Trump, the ICC. We cannot forget this in this context. And by continuously pressuring Ukraine and only Ukraine, by excluding Ukraine from the peace talks as well in Saudi Arabia. It's several factors that creates a picture of the United States being simply pro-Russia. The move underscores the foreign policy shift in Washington as the Trump administration seeks to restore ties with Moscow while pushing for a swift peace deal in Ukraine. There you go. That's basically all you need to know. The United States will abandon investigating war crimes if it leads to the US normalizing relations with Russia. That's all there that is all there is to it. The decision is expected to be announced on March 17th in an email to the group's parent organization, the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, the New York Times wrote. And actually, it has been already confirmed by the European Union that the US will withdraw. Like, this is no longer a speculation. It has been already confirmed on the European Union side, just so you know. That has been a fairly new development to this story. The Hague based International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine is a judicial hub supporting national investigations into the crime of aggression committed by the Russian leadership, including President Vladimir Putin and Moscow's allies against Ukraine. While the group is made up of specialists from Ukraine, Poland, Romania, and the Baltic countries, the Biden administration appointed a special prosecutor to support the hub's activities in 2023. The Trump administration will also reduce the work of the U.S. Justice Department's War Crimes Accountability Team, which was launched in 2022 to investigate Russia for the atrocities it had committed during the full-scale invasion. So, not just the children, the United States will try to avoid holding Russia accountable for any of its war crimes for as long as it leads to the normalization of relations. Also, by the way, the cutting of US aid, which is another element to that, the cut of US aid, which provided international worldwide humanitarian aid, it has led Ukraine to also not be able to fund its NGOs that investigated Russia war crimes. Just so you know, the US is withdrawing from the investigation of Russia war crimes in many, many different ways. Ukraine is investigating more than 150,000 possible war crimes committed by Russia as part of its all-out war, including the summary execution of prisoners and targeted aerial strikes against civilians. US President Donald Trump has sought to mend the ties with Moscow in an effort to bring a swift end to the war. And a swift end to the war would basically, in Trump's mind, mean soldiers stop shooting at one another. He doesn't care which lands get occupied by Russia. He doesn't care how many people will find themselves under occupation. He doesn't care about the internal displacement that it'll cause. He doesn't care about the refugee crisis that it'll cause. He doesn't care how those people will be treated under occupation. He doesn't care about the Russification. He doesn't care about possibly more children being kidnapped under the occupation when the war ends. He just doesn't care about these things as long as he can be treated as the peace broker, as the person that brought peace, that ended the hostilities, while adopting a more antagonistic stance toward Ukraine and other partners. Imagine adopting a more antagonistic stance towards victims of aggression That is the face of the United States right now. The US has briefly halted military and intelligence support for Kyiv, while also cutting key foreign aid, supporting programs aimed at the prosecution of Russian war crimes and the restoration of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. On the international scene, the US has sought to water down joint statements labeling Russia as the aggressor and the sole obstacle to peace. Because in Trump's mind, Ukraine is actually the obstacle to peace because they stubbornly don't want um, an unfavorable ceasefire. It is a very, very bad situation in which the United States have decided to undermine the investigation of Russian war crimes. Most importantly, the war crimes against Ukrainian children. Wouldn't you agree? That is one of the most outrageous things that the United States can be engaging in right now. The abstraction of holding people accountable for that commit genocide. The United States, I guess, does not care about genocide as long as it means returning to business as usual, which is very disappointing to say the least. But then again, not caring about genocide is nothing new for great powers, but we're not going to discuss other conflicts in which this is evident. We're just going to focus on this one for now. All right, that has been the topic of the Ukrainian children domestically, internationally, and in Ukraine. There are three aspects. There are three ways in which the US has undermined legitimate efforts to prosecute Russian crimes against Ukraine, guiding the team that helped to rescue children. Two, withdrawing from the international organization that investigated Russian crimes. And three, pulling away US aid, humanitarian help that helped fund organizations in Ukraine that also investigated Russian crimes. Those three things added together give us a picture of the United States that basically willingly or unwillingly serves Russia's interest.